कीर्केगार्ड की किताब फिलोसॉफिकल फ्रैगमेंट्स के चैप्टर 2 का नाम है द गॉड एज टीचर एंड सेवियर एन एसे ऑफ द इमेजिनेशन, जिसमें कीर्केगार्ड एक ह्यूमन टीचर और एक ट्रांसेंडेंट गॉड के बीच का फ़र्क मज़ीद वाज़ेह करता है। वो कहता है कि एक ह्यूमन टीचर जो है, फॉर एग्जांपल जो सॉक्रेटिस है, जो उसने कंसिडर किया था इन थॉट प्रोजेक्ट ए इन चैप्टर 1, दिस ह्यूमन टीचर इज़ पार्ट ऑफ द वर्ल्ड, ही हैज़ एन इंक्लिनेशन, अ कॉल, अ प्रॉम्प्टिंग टू बी अ टीचर, एंड द लर्नर्स, अदर पीपल, हैव एन इंक्लिनेशन टू लर्न। तो इस टीचर की एक म्यूचुअल रिलेशनशिप है विद द लर्नर हु इज़ ऑल्सो द पार्ट ऑफ द वर्ल्ड। कीर्केगार्ड कहता है इस बारे में, himself influenced by circumstances, he in turn exerted an influence upon them. In accomplishing his task, he satisfied the claims within himself just as much as he satisfied the claims other people might have on him. Understood in this way, and this was indeed the Socratic understanding, the teacher stands in a reciprocal relation, inasmuch as life and its situations are the occasion for him to become a teacher, and he in turn the occasion for others to learn something. दोनों टीचर और लर्नर इसी वर्ल्ड का पार्ट है, एंड बोथ ऑफ देम आर इन्वॉल्व्ड इन इट्स नेक्सस ऑफ म्यूचुअल रिलेशंस. द पीपल इज द ओकेजन फॉर द टीचर टू अंडरस्टैंड हिमसेल्फ, एंड द टीचर इज द ओकेजन फॉर द पीपल टू अंडरस्टैंड हिमसेल्फ. कीर्केगार्ड इस बारे में कहता है कि जो टीचर की इक्वालिटी है, टीचर क्वे टीचर, इट इज़ इन द लर्नर. दिस इज़ वेयर द टीचर इज एट वर्क मेकिंग द लर्नर एक्चुअली लर्न. और दूसरी तरफ द एक्चुअलिटी ऑफ द लर्नर क्वे लर्नर इज इन द टीचर. दिस इज़ वेयर द लर्नर इज एट वर्क मेकिंग द टीचर एक्चुअली टीच. दोनों एक दूसरे के लिए मटेरियल या फिर मीन्स प्रोवाइड कर रहे हैं फॉर देयर एक्चुअलाइजेशन. लेकिन इवन दो ईच ऑफ देम इज द ओकेजन फॉर द अदर टू अंडरस्टैंड हिमसेल्फ और ग्रैस्प हिमसेल्फ एज अ टीचर और अ लर्नर, इनकी जो रिलेशन है वो एक्सीडेंटल नहीं है. ये जो टीचर है वो किसी और को भी पढ़ा सकता था, और ये जो लर्नर है वो किसी और से भी सीख सकता था. तो नाइदर हैज़ अ क्लेम एज एन इंडिविजुअल ऑन द अदर. इन दोनों में से किसी ने अगले बंदे को वो कैपेसिटी नहीं दी जो उसको ज़रूरी है टू आइदर टीच और टू लर्न, बट ऑल दे हैव डन इज़ एक्चुअलाइज दिस. लेकिन दूसरी तरफ, अकॉर्डिंग टू थॉट प्रोजेक्ट बी, गॉड्स रिलेशन टू द लर्नर इज़ डिफरेंट. उसको कोई प्यूपिल की ज़रूरत नहीं है इन ऑर्डर टू अंडरस्टैंड हिमसेल्फ. द अदर डज नॉट एक्चुअलाइज हिज पोटेंशियलिटी. जो लर्नर है वो खुदा की पोटेंशियलिटी को एक्चुअलाइज नहीं कर रहा. It does not give him the material for his activity. The pupil does not have the condition requisite for learning, and thus cannot provide him with any material by which he can actualize himself as a teacher. The teacher must himself create the material. लेकिन जो learner है वो टीचर को इस thought project B के मुताबिक कैसे मोटिवेट कर सकता है to come into contact with him? What can move this teacher, this God, to teach the learner? Kierkegaard says that the God must move himself. लेकिन इस मूविंग का, God moving himself to come into contact with the learner, इस चीज़ का मोटिव क्या है? क्योंकि ये जो टीचर और ये प्यूपिल हैं, ये दोनों एक वर्ल्ड में, इस थॉट प्रोजेक्ट बी के अंडर एक वर्ल्ड में एग्जिस्ट नहीं कर सकते, और इस एक वर्ल्ड में एग्जिस्ट नहीं करते और एक दूसरे को अकॉर्डिंगली इन्फ्लुएंस नहीं करते. तो कीर्केगार्ड क्लेम करता है कि what moves the teacher, what moves the God is love. इसको समझने का एक तरीका वो बयान करता है इज़ टू थिंक ऑफ दिस थ्रू द प्रोक्रिएटिव लव दैट बिगेट्स. क्योंकि डिज़ायर जो है एक सेंस में प्रोक्रिएटिव होता है. जो मैं डिज़ायर करता हूँ, मेरी विल उस चीज़ को एक्चुअलाइज करने में लग जाती है. अगर तो वो डिज़ायर एक्टिव है, आई एक्ट टू ब्रिंग अबाउट अ डिज़ायर्ड ऑब्जेक्ट और कंडीशन. द एक्शन इज़ नॉट कॉज्ड बाय इट्स ऑब्जेक्ट विच डज नॉट येट एग्जिस्ट. इट इज़ रादर क्रिएटिव ऑफ द ऑब्जेक्ट, एंड दिस कीर्केगार्ड सेज इज़ in a radical sense true of God. God's love precedes the world. As prior to the world, he needs nothing in it to act. His love also creates the world. So in a sense, Kierkegaard ये कहना चाह रहा है कि खुदा के पास कोई external motivation नहीं है, लेकिन सिर्फ एक internal one है, the conception of what it will bring about. अब Kierkegaard कहता है कि ये जो खुदा है, who was eternally before the world, who existed before the world, and hence he is outside of time, which is a worldly concept. ये जो इंटरनल मोटिवेशन है ये भी इंटरनल है. इट इज़ आउटसाइड द वर्ल्ड एंड हेंस कैन नॉट बी डिटर्मिन्ड बाय एनीथिंग टेम्परल इन इट. इस बारे में कीर्केगार्ड कहता है, हिज रेजोल्यूशन विच डज नॉट हैव एन इक्वल रेसिप्रोकल रिलेशन टू द ओकेजन मस्ट बी फ्रॉम एटर्निटी, इवन दो फुलफिल्ड इन टाइम इट एक्सप्रेसली बिकम्स द मोमेंट. अब कीर्केगार्ड बात करता है एक और सेंस ऑफ लव की, दैट ऑफ म्यूचुअलिटी और इक्वालिटी. वो कहता है, moved by love, the God is thus eternally resolved to reveal himself. But as love is the motive, so love must also be the end. For it would be a contradiction for the God to have a motive and an end which did not correspond. His love is a love of the learner, and his aim is to win him. For it is only in love that the unequal can be made equal, and it is only in equality or unity that an understanding can be effected. And without a perfect understanding, the teacher is not the God, unless the obstacle comes wholly from the side of the learner, in his refusing to realize that which had been made possible for him. अब यहाँ पे दो सेंसेस ऑफ लव वो बयान करता है. पहला जो है वो एक क्रिएटिव लव है दैट क्रिएट्स इट्स ऑब्जेक्ट. दूसरा लव है द लव दैट एम्स एट इक्वालिटी. और ये दोनों कॉन्फ्लिक्ट में है. I am not equal to what my love brings about. I am superior. I am the conditioned and the object is the conditioned. लेकिन दूसरी तरफ I strive for equality. I strive for her to love me as a lover. I want to win her love for me and establish an understanding in which we are equal partners. हमें यही चीज़ नज़र आती है in a parent-child relationship. जो child है he is the result of the parents' creative love. लेकिन उनकी जो रिलेशन है वो म्यूचुअल नहीं है. कुछ पेरेंट्स ट्राई करते हैं कि वो इस चीज़ को रिजॉल्व करें बाय बिकमिंग फ्रेंड्स विद द चिल्ड्रन, बट दिस ऑफ्टन डज नॉट वर्क, क्योंकि जो बच्चा है वो समझता है कि जो पेरेंट है वो अपनी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी एज अ पेरेंट को एब्डिकेट कर रहा है. ही डज नॉट, द चाइल्ड नॉट ऑलवेज वांट्स अ फ्रेंड बट अ पेरेंट. और कीर्केगार्ड यहाँ पे हमें एक एक्सट्रीम एग्जाम्पल देता है इसी चीज़ की. How can the creator establish a relation of equality with the creature? Without equality, how can there be a relation of love? Kierkegaard इस बारे में कहता है, Yet this love is basically unhappy, for they are very unequal, and what seems so easy, namely that the God must be able to make himself understood, is not so easy if he is not to destroy that which is different. The unhappiness is the result not of the lovers' being unable to have each other, but of their being unable to understand each other. कीर्केगार्ड कहता है कि कोई भी ह्यूमन सिचुएशन इसके लिए एक वैलिड एनालॉजी नहीं प्रोवाइड कर सकती. और इस लिमिटेशन को एडमिट करते हुए कीर्केगार्ड स्टिल एक एनालॉजी सजेस्ट करता है फॉर द डिवाइन लव. और ये मिसाल है एक किंग की हु लव्स अ मेडन ऑफ लोली स्टेशन फॉर एग्जाम्पल. वो इस कहानी को बयान करता है इन दीज वर्ड्स. Suppose a king who loved a humble maiden. The heart of the king was not polluted by the wisdom that is loudly enough proclaimed. He knew nothing of the difficulties that the understanding discovers in order to ensnare the heart, which keep the poets so busy and make their magic formulas necessary. It was easy to realize his purpose. Every statesman feared his wrath and dared not breathe a word of displeasure. Every foreign state trembled before his power, and dared not omit sending ambassadors with congratulations for the nuptials. No courtier, grovelling in the dust, dared wound him, lest his own head be crushed. Then let the harp be tuned, let the songs of the poets begin to sound, and let all be festive while love celebrates its triumph. For love is exultant when it unites equals, but it is triumphant when it makes that which was unequal equal in love. Then there awoke in the heart of the king an anxious thought. Who but a king who thinks kingly thoughts would have dreamed of it? He spoke to no one about his anxiety, for if he had, each courtier would have doubtless have said, Your Majesty is about to confer a favor upon the maiden, for which she can never be sufficiently grateful her whole long life. This speech would have moved the king to wrath, so that he would have commanded the execution of the courtier for high treason against the beloved, and thus he would in still another way have found his grief increased. So he wrestled with his troubled thoughts alone. Would she be happy in the life at his side? Would she be able to summon confidence enough never to remember what the king wished, only to forget that he was king and she had been a humble maiden? For if this memory were to awaken in her soul, and like a favored lover sometimes steals her thoughts away from the king, luring her reflections into the seclusion of a secret grief, or if this memory sometimes passed through her soul like the shadow of death over the grave, where would then be the glory of their love? Then she would have been happier had she remained in her obscurity, loved by an equal, content in her humble cottage, but confident in her love, and cheerful early and late. What a rich abundance of grief is here laid bare, like ripened grain bent under the weight of its fruitfulness, merely waiting the time of the harvest, when the thought of the king will thresh out all its seed of sorrow. For even if the maiden would be content to become as nothing, this could not satisfy the king, precisely because he loved her, and because it was harder for him to be her benefactor than to lose her. And suppose she could not even understand him. For while we are thus speaking foolishly of human relationships, we may suppose a difference of mind between them, such as to render an understanding impossible. What a depth of grief slumbers not in this unhappy love! Who dares to rouse it? However, no human being is destined to suffer such grief. Him we may refer to Socrates, or to that which in a still more beautiful sense can make the unequal equal. जो किंग है इस कहानी में, he is concerned whether she would acquire the bold confidence never to remember what the king only wished to forget, that he was the king and she had been a lowly maiden. And if she does remember, then the equality of love is ruined. But this is his goal. Kierkegaard इस बारे में कहता है, but if the moment is to have decisive significance, and if not, we return to Socrates even if we think to advance beyond him, the learner is in error, and that by reason of his own guilt. And yet he is the object of God's love, and the God desires to teach him, and is concerned to bring him to equality with himself. If this equality cannot be established, the God's love becomes unhappy, and his teaching meaningless, since they cannot understand one another. कीर्केगार्ड यहाँ पे कह रहा है कि ट्रू लव इन्वॉल्व करता है एक म्यूचुअलिटी ऑफ अंडरस्टैंडिंग. जो लवर है वो चाहता है कि बिलवड उसको अंडरस्टैंड करे, उसके साथ सिंपथाइज करे. एंड द सेम होल्ड्स इन द ऑपोजिट डायरेक्शन. बट द क्वेश्चन इज दिस पॉसिबल विद गॉड? हाउ इज गॉड टू सॉल्व दिस प्रॉब्लम अकॉर्डिंग टू कीर्केगार्ड? एक सोल्यूशन वो प्रोवाइड करता है, वो ये है कि परहैप्स बाय रेजिंग अप द लर्नर. लेकिन ऑन द अदर हैंड, this is to deceive the learner. The learner जो है, जो maiden है, she is not on the level of the king or the god. Thus, the king in exalting the maiden sees that the girl would be essentially deceived, and one is most terribly deceived when one does not even suspect it but remains as if spellbound by a change of costume, to quote Kierkegaard. तो ये जो डिसेप्शन है, ये म्यूचुअलिटी ऑफ अंडरस्टैंडिंग को डिस्ट्रॉय करता है. तो दूसरा अल्टरनेटिव जो है वो ये है कि जो किंग है वो अपने आप को लोअर करे टू द लेवल ऑफ द मेडन. सिंस द बिलवड कुड बी वन ऑफ द लोलीस्ट, देन द गॉड विल ऑल्सो अपेयर एज वन ऑफ द लोलीस्ट. कॉन्सिक्वेंटली द गॉड विल अपेयर इन द फॉर्म ऑफ अ सर्वेंट. लेकिन यहाँ पे जो डिफिकल्टी है वो ये है कि गॉड विल नॉट बी रिकग्नाइज्ड. Even worse, it could be that the person he loves is someone who loves only the omnipotent one who performs miracles, not him who humbled himself in equality with him. तो सवाल यह है कि how do we understand the God who humbled himself? To the point that he humbles himself, he deceives us. He does not appear as he is. The king एक king है, not a humble servant. तो यहाँ पे फिर हम एक lack of understanding में फंस जाते हैं. Kierkegaard इस बारे में कहता है, in the Socratic conception, the teacher's love would be merely that of a deceiver if he permitted the disciple to rest in the belief that he really owed him anything, instead of fulfilling the function of the teacher to help the learner become sufficient to himself. But when the God becomes a teacher, his love cannot be merely seconding and assisting, but is creative, giving a new being to the learner, or as we have called him, the man born anew, by which designation we signify the transition from non-being to being. The truth then is that the learner owes the teacher everything, but this is what makes it so difficult to affect an understanding, that the learner becomes as nothing and yet is not destroyed, that he comes to owe everything to the teacher and he retains his confidence, that he understands the truth and yet that the truth makes him free, that he apprehends the guilt of his error and yet that his confidence rises victorious in the truth. Between man and man, the Socratic midwifery is the highest relation, and begetting is reserved for the God, whose love is creative, but not merely in the sense which Socrates so beautifully expounds on a certain festal occasion.